Only Murders in the Building is got its own challenges, and it's does this balancing act of sort of broad comedy, character drama, and the murder plot. When I remember getting emails for Manhattan Edit Workshop and being really excited that someone put together something like that. If it's a tennis documentary about tennis players, they want you to have done a tennis show. It's not like, well, I did this bowling show. No, 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 that's not quite enough. There are a couple of things that I do think AI should be used for, but I'm not going to say what they are because I might be able to make $1 million creating it.
Hey everyone, I'm Rafi Salem, back with Manhattan Edit Workshop. Today we have the pleasure of speaking with Matthew Barbato. Welcome, Matthew.
Thank
And
you.
of course, as usual, we have Josh Apter and Jason Banke. Thank you so much for joining us today. Josh, why don't you tell us a little bit about Manhattan Edit Workshop and then kick it to Jason. Jason will introduce Matthew.
All right. I had to put myself on mute because there's an echo because Rafi is here because you're not always in the country. I'm looking at him right now. That's why I'm looking up above the screen. This is the magic of our video podcasts, is that we get to reveal some of our tricks here. But my name is Josh. After I founded Manhattan Edit Workshop, over 20 years ago, with the sort of mission to teach the art and technique of editing. And in this day and age, obviously, you can learn the buttons in many, many different places and with many different, methods. But we started a 4-week workshop that then became a 6-week workshop in it's sort of like a boot camp for editors. So you'd learn the main tools, but also how to apply them in different situations, whether it's documentary, short form, narrative. And when we expanded it, we did it to provide for a few weeks of working with an artist in residence, which Matthew was one. It was his last year, I believe.
A few months ago.
Oh, it was just a few months ago. Okay, how time flies.
Feels like
And the odd thing was during the pandemic, it really was a forcing mechanism for us to figure out how to do our courses remotely. Obviously, no one was doing them in person, and it made a lot of things challenging, but it also made it easier to work with different artists and residents who are in different places. Prior to that, we would fly them in to New York if they could, or catch someone when they were working locally. And it really opened up the doors to working with so many other people who wouldn't otherwise be able to just tune in and pop on over Zoom and participate with the class. So made that a lot easier. And as I'm done sort of giving the 6-week rant, as I always do to start these off, I'll give it to Jason to talk about your experience. You were a student, and then an intern, and then the office manager, and now you're the president of the company, Jason.
Well, you just said it, so I don't really. I'll talk about Matt. So, Matthew, I obviously we've seen your work, Matthew, and everything, but I think you first came on our personal radar. I think we interviewed you for 2 different projects you worked on for Filmmaker U, our other venture. I think it was for Lessons in Chemistry, and then for Only Murders in the Building. But once we had that, you spoke with one of my other colleagues. I think we were decided with Janet, our director of education, that you'd be a great fit for our class, which is why we brought you in for the artist in residence. You accepted. But to start off, usually what we like to do is really kind of find out what your journey was like to get you to dive into the post-production world. Like everybody's path seems to be different, but how did your path, where did you grow up and how did you get to the place you are kind of, I know it's a long jump, but where you are now?
a long time. Well, I grew up just a couple hours north of the city in the Hudson Valley. Went to school up there. Went to the University of SUNY New Paltz. I also went to Purchase, where I did not study film, but I tried to get into the film program, couldn't get in, ended up in a different place. And when I graduated, I took some film classes and I had an aptitude for editing, but I didn't think about editing as a career path. I wanted to be a director or a DP. And this is all pre-internet, so I'm going to talk about stuff that maybe some people won't remember. But used to be a book in New York called the MPE Guide, which was like a little phone book
Sure.
for all the anything you needed production wise, rental houses, whatever it was. And I got my hands on one a couple hours north of New York City, and I sent out 210 resumes just cold to any place I thought might hire me for something. And I got about half of them back saying that they were no longer at that address, which was my first indication of what the industry might be like. And those things are updated every year, so I don't know what happened there. But I got one response, and I got called down to the city to have an interview for basically an office, someone sit behind the desk and answer the phone in a small production company that had three producers and one editor, and they did a lot of sports documentaries, which was not at all what my thing was. And I got the job somehow. I don't know what happened. And they're still friends and mentors to this day. They're great people. And I just sat and answered phones for a little while. And shortly after that, they got their first sort of longer series, which was a children's scripted series. And it was they were gonna start with the first nonlinear editing system that they had ever worked with before, and it was called the EMC back then. It was before Avid even was available. And they said, "Do you want to be the assistant editor?" And I said, "Absolutely. Anything to be closer to working on things than answering phones." And so I worked there and was the assistant editor for the editor that they had in-house for a bunch of years until we got to a point where they had a big enough project that I could graduate to editor. And then it was the boom of cable content and all sorts of unscripted stuff in New York City. And I was out there doing all of the different stuff that people were doing back then, Trauma Life in the ER and like all sorts of crazy Learning Channel and Discovery Channel things. And in there, I got to do a little bit of scripted stuff. They had other kids shows that they brought me back to, my mentors, but ultimately, I ended up moving on to shooting and directing and producing some of those things, and sort of what do they call it, crediting back then, producing and editing different projects that were unscripted. I always wanted to be in scripted and I never had a plan. So I was always kind of rambling from one opportunity to the next. I ended up directing a few unscripted things, like a talk show for Oxygen Network. I ended up directing episodes of Anthony Bourdain's first ever series, was called Cook's Tour on the Food Network. And eventually I decided to give LA a try. And when I came out here, it took me a long time to get reestablished because my resume didn't count for much. It was all about connections and people that you knew. And every interview I went in, they all presumed that I was just a tourist and I was going back to New York, which I could understand why they felt that because in my heart, I wanted to be back in New York. But eventually I got a foothold in and I kind of had to start almost from the ground up and in unscripted until I finally got a break in scripted comedy, which was, I had no real experience in comedy, but a bunch of Adult Swim. This is after the strike, and people were doing a lot of stuff on YouTube. And then those YouTube shows were getting bought up by a lot of these new channels that were emerging, and Adult Swim was one. And so I just started to work on a lot of Adult Swim content, and that led to some network shows, and then the streaming blew up. And the theme in this is always that there's this explosion of content needed to fill. So it was cable, and then it was the post-strike stuff turning, and then streaming, and these opportunities arose within all of those things to get sucked by the vacuum of need into these new things, which we are in the reverse of now.
Dramatically.
Yeah.
But I had a question because I have a friend who worked in documentary and unscripted and found it almost impossible to make a transition into narrative. He actually never did. But so I think you're saying like the Adult Swim opportunity was the sort of first or early move to scripted. How did that happen? Did someone say, "Look, we don't have anybody to do it," or was there something about? You tell me, like, how did that leap occur? Because that's a lot of people ask about how to transition.
Yeah, and it usually happens in these moments where someone's spending a lot of money creating content, and so then you can bring in. There was also a stigma attached that if you were unscripted or documentary, you didn't know how to do scripted or narrative. Now that's changed because I don't get into the specifics of it. But in my case, what happened was that I had a friend who was a producer in New York, and I had not really worked with him before, but he was the one who was executive producing this Adult Swim show. And he was moving out with all the cast and everything was already out here. And he said, "Hey, just for fun, do you want to do one episode of this show?" And I said, "Yes, absolutely." There's a whole story in there where he actually was going to take that opportunity away from me on like on the eve of it happening, but I we got into a little bit of a thing, and I demanded. I said I kept I turned down work in order to be available for it, and his other executive producer partners looked at my resume and said, "What are you doing? This guy can't do it." Luckily, I got in there and I did an episode, and they were like, "Oh, he can do it." And that led
Mhm.
to more episodes, and it led to other series. And then I became like the lead editor on several other series. And so I got lucky. I had a connection. I made the best of the opportunity. Things were exploding at that time. Other people were coming in from unscripted, and it was a time in comedy where the UCB people were kind of taking over, and that improv aesthetic and was more prominent in production at the time. And so they looked at people with unscripted experience as a value because you could take pieces and put them together and not have to have need a script to guide you along. And I will say that, working and starting in unscripted and documentary is a tremendous benefit because you do approach all your footage, even in scripted, as just clay that you can, use however you want to use and really look at what is the goal you're trying to do, not, well, this is what they said it should be. And
Yep.
then problems you can be very resourceful about it.
No, I think that the sort of writer's experience of editing nonfiction as an editor, you're telling the story is really like there is some um it's a different activity, but it sort of applies, I don't want to say down to scripted, but the idea that you couldn't do scripted having done like documentary doesn't make any sense. I would think on some level, I don't want to say it would be easier, but certainly doable because yeah, everything's an opportunity. You're not thinking of it like, oh, well, I only have this covered. You're like, well, how can I make this happen? Or is there some other place that I can pull? Like it's just a way of thinking that comes from working in nonfiction.
Yeah.
So what was the show on Adult Swim, or were there a bunch of shows?
Well, the first one was Children's Hospital with Rob Corddry, David Wayne, and a whole cast of people. And
Mhm.
then that led to a show called NTSF SDSUV, which was a satire of all the NCSI stuff. That was with Paul Scheer. That was a really great working relationship. And then there was a show called Newsreaders, and a couple of little things that I did with them. Wet Hot American Summer, the TV shows. Yeah.
Well, that sounds great. I mean, I hope people watching don't get like they like because it's easy to get discouraged because they saw that you did it and then said, "Oh, he can do it," and so many people refuse to even take that risk.
Yeah, and I have to say that, the biggest thing that there's always if you're trying to transition, and the advice that I always give anybody that's starting is if you know what you want to do, if you want to do comedy features, do everything you can to get your foot in the door there because you get pulled up in that system and it's harder, all these genres and formats and different things, it's harder to switch. There's just, and I used to be resentful of it as an editor when I'd go in and, try to get a drama show after doing comedy or just trying to get a scripted show after doing unscripted and feel like, why can't they see that I can do the job that they can do? As I matured a bit, I understand from a producer's point of view, editing is one of the things you can look at a cinematographer's reel and say, okay, I like those shots. I know that this person can do it. But you look at it anyway, you don't know whether or not somebody, a producer came in with a heavy hand and fixed the editing or changed the editing. A director, was really hands-on with it. You just don't know. And back in the day, especially in unscripted, the margins for producers were so low that if they hired an editor on and they weren't paid them for a week and found out at the end of that week that they didn't know what they were doing, they just lost their profit for that episode. And so I started to understand like that they don't know what they're looking for. And so what they look for is a strong recommendation from someone they know, or some that you've done exactly what they like. If it's a tennis documentary about tennis players, they want you to have done a tennis show. It's not like, well, I did this bowling show. No, 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 that's not quite enough. If it's competition, if it's like if any kind of stylization, they're like, if you haven't done that before, I got turned down when I first came out here on by so many people that I had strong recommendations coming from New York, and they were just like, yeah, but you haven't done this exact thing. And it took me a really long time, and it was really discouraging. And I gave up on my hope of ever doing scripted at a certain point, when you have to pay your bills and you have a family. And I would take breaks. I would do something that I would have to take. I went and did I got AE credits on certain things that were in scripted because I hoped that it would lead to something, and then it didn't lead to anything. And so there are all sorts of times where you can take a chance and it doesn't pay off, and then something happens and maybe you get lucky and it does.
It reminds me of Steely Dan when they were producing music. They would have, I don't know, two or three different guitarists actually try out the same solo in their own style. But obviously they had the budget to do it more than in film.
Right, right. Yeah, and it's still a bit like that. I mean, I've gotten to a place where the stuff I'm doing has decent budgets, and I'm also in a place in my career where I think people understand that like I'm going to be able to pull it off for them. So that's a nice place to be.
So I
Sure.
noticed that you did the first season of Only Murders in the Building, and then you did the fourth season. Is
Yeah.
that like, have you ever done something like that where you've like something got established, you were there for all that and building that up and making it into basically a franchise, and then come back and it's like it's something completely, I mean, it's the same folks, without the ones that have died, but like it's the same primary people. As
Yeah.
I mean, is that something that's like unique to that? And what was that experience like if it was?
Yeah, I've never done anything like that before. I tend to, because I like to work and the way that schedules are now, 10, 15 years ago, it would be you'd work on one show, then you do a pilot, and then you'd go back to the show. But because of the way things are always starting, uh, you'll, I'll end a show, start a new show that when the time comes, the other show, there's a conflict and I can't go back. In that case, I ended up getting a feature. So I was doing a feature when season 2 came around and I couldn't do it. But when I watched the show, Only Murders in the Building is got its own challenges, and it's does this balancing act of sort of broad comedy, character drama, and the murder plot. And I find like we tried in the first season to really get the right balance of those so that, like an Adam, like they were just stretching each uh component as far as they could go. Then I watched season 2 and I was like, oh my God, they keep pushing the ability of these components to go farther and farther and still sort of hold together and not feel like, they're doing disparate things. And then season 3 was even more of it. And season 4, when I came back, and I was very happy to be invited back, I was like curious what they were going to do. And it's somehow just the show somehow he's created this world where it works. I mean, it doesn't hurt that we have really genius comedian cast and they can deliver funny lines and then emotional lines in the same scene. We do have to kind of calibrate that, and that's sort of the fun of it is that we have these different takes and performances that we get, and we get to choose in editing how to build the scene so that it doesn't fall apart and it doesn't feel fake or phony. Um, yeah, I don't know if I'm answering your question.
What was the question, Jason? No.
Season 4, come back for season 4.
That you make an interesting point, like in terms of what scripted has that documentary doesn't, is that ability to have multiple performances, multiple takes of the same performance to say, like, I need to scale this, I need to modulate this. Which one worked best, in the middle of act 2 versus like something early on. And it's a different kind of clay that you're molding with, but it's really it is really fun to like, or like the performance of one is right, but the audio from one that didn't look right is, and you can sort of like mishmash them together, and you're like, oh my God, now I've got like the perfect Franken take that,
Yeah.
does everything. I mean, that's subjective, but that you're playing in a different, sort of like a different field of options.
That's yeah, no, that's absolutely right. It's sort of like you're doing the same thing, but instead of instead of taking I'm going to make a terrible, and I was about to make a terrible analogy, and it was going to go off the rail. So I'm going to stop and just say, I agree with you, and it is a lot of fun because, but it's the same thing. You're taking the pieces of what you have and
Mhm.
trying to create the best, strongest story that you can.
I want to know what the analogy is now. We'll never know.
Half baked. It was half baked.
Okay. All right.
Probably one of the smartest things I've ever done for my career. It gave me all the tools that I needed to be able to jump into a new career. Getting myself into a mindset, thinking like an editor, and being around people that I can talk to on that level was really invaluable to me.
A lot of the things that I learned from that class, I still think about.
I loved the classroom. I loved the computer stations. We built a sense of community.
And it also instills a lot of confidence in you to take that and go out into the world.
After I took the class, I felt very prepared to take the next step.
I owe Manhattan Workshop the career that I have right now.
Things have been going great, and I really have the Manhattan Workshop to thank for that.
I had a question. I did a panel on lessons in chemistry, and it was such an absorbing, beautifully performed, the production design, cinematography, the editing. You were on episode 2 or more than 1 and 2. Okay. So, 2 is big episode, and I don't want to give anything away, but are you responsible for that moment at the end of episode 2? I don't have to talk about it, but it was like, I remember the first time you felt something was wrong, but you certainly couldn't have imagined what you were about to see. But is that, because you co-edited that, or were you at the only
Co-edited. My assistant at the time, Jack Cunningham, he did the bulk of that scene, if not all of it. We trimmed it up a little bit from what it was because our concern always was, having people anticipate where it's going. And so, and then there was some reshoots to get that moment just right. Things, it was tricky because it's a big twist in the episode. I mean, it feels weird not talking about it how many years later, but
I mean, okay, fine. Spoiler alert, or
right.
He gets hit by a bus.
Yeah. So, and it's changed. I mean, we really tried really hard to set up, and I think we did pretty well in episode 2 what this series is going to be about, and then we just take it away.
It's pretty devastating. I mean, I think, look, from a writing standpoint and watching the thing, it's like, who goes jogging at the end of the show, right? Like, right? I mean, there's something, you're too late in the length of the show for it to not be significant. But it doesn't make it any less, horrifying. And then, of course, it's like the bottom just dropped out of the entire of her whole life. So then, where does it go from here? But it's also just in general, and there were other episodes where I think I noticed I mean, there's plenty of humor, which is great because it does have, it's a very real show in that it has moments of incredible sadness and introspection and incredible humor, momentum. It's really, I don't know. I'm glad that I was a fan of it because up until then I hadn't been such a fan of Apple programming. And this one never felt like they were letting the middle episode sort of just, sort of spin around, keep you engaged until they got to the meat of the story. It was really, and I maybe to credit, the credit of the book that this is like that, but it was really, really beautifully laid out.
The series is significantly different than the book. In a lot of ways. The book's great, but there are a lot of changes. The neighbor is a completely different character from what the book is, and so a lot of the storylines in this show are invented. It's a great show to work on. Good performances, good. Like you said, the directing was amazing. The production design was really incredible. And yeah, Lee Eisenberg was the showrunner on that.
Mhm.
So going back to what Jason had talked about before, in terms of episode 1 to episode 4, or I should say season 1 to season 4, is it that the other two people or the other one person that did seasons 2 and 3 weren't available again, then you were available?
So what happened on Only Murders is actually there were 3 of us and none of us could come back for season 2. And so they got 3 whole new people, and after season 3, one of them couldn't come back, so they had an open spot, and they reached out. They were looking. They assumed the 3 of us couldn't come back for season 1, but they reached out anyway, and I was available. So, yeah, it was really fortuitous because, I don't often have the chance to go back because of like I said, my schedule and how things just don't work out. But some shows are really good and fun to work on. So to get the opportunity to come back to it was really great. But yeah, just scheduling.
Yeah. So there's scheduling, and the other thing that we've been talking with a lot of editors here on Talking MEWShop. By the way, everyone should be liking and subscribing and commenting. We keep on forgetting to say that, but just remembered. We've been talking about COVID and remote working also. So I'm wondering if any of that happened while that, but Jason, you also wanted to ask something.
Yeah, I was just curious, like in a show like Only Murders in a Bit, like who do you like take notes from? Like, is there the directors from each episode? Are you taking it from the producers like Steve Martin, or is there like a specific showrunner? Like, how do they get like notes and define like here's the storyline and this is what we want you to do for your episode?
You get the script and you get the footage and you cut your first cut, the editor's cut, and you have, I don't know how many days it is, 9 or 10 days or something to cut that. And then you hand that to the directors, and this is kind of the same way for all comedies, and dramas are slightly different, but so the directors have 2 or 3 days. It's changed now because of the recent new contract. And they can come in, or if it's remote, if they can work with you for 2 days, and they may send in a page of notes and you do them, and then you work with them on Jump. And after they're done, they kind of have left the process, and it goes on to the executive producers, and they get a pass, and they have their say, and they'll either get on again. Sometimes it's just written notes that we can understand how to execute, and sometimes we work together. And then once they're happy with it, it gets sent out to studio. On some shows, it goes to the network first. They get a chance to do the notes, and then once they're done, it goes to the studio, and then it comes back, and then they get a second pass on it, and then they show it that, and then you lock it, and you say, okay, we've done all the notes. On Only Murders, the studio network is one pass that goes together. And so, yeah, it's like this whole process. And what your hope is, and especially once you've established a show, you tend to get less notes because everyone sort of knows how it should be. We don't, we put a great deal of effort into sending them a really good cut with no issues that they should have to worry about. So usually their notes are additive or just like a fresh set of eyes and, help clear things up. Occasionally you'll get an episode that just has some issues that, weren't apparent during the script phase, and you have to kind of work. And what I find is that every episode, if there's anything to really work on it, we know what that thing is from the beginning, and it's like a thing that no one can really agree on how it should be, and so there's debates about it all the way to the final set of notes. It's like, and it's usually something that it's like it's very subjective.
So did you ever hit a hole in one, as it were, where you just banded in a cut and nobody had? I can't imagine that ever happens, but like it's just like great job.
I've come pretty close, but there's always like a little thing here because no one, that their job is to give notes, so they're gonna come up and give notes. And when we hand it in, we hand in temp score. And then we'll get notes on score, like, oh, this needs to be more, and we say, okay, yes. When the composer comes in, they'll do that. And so
Mhm.
you kind of know that those notes are kind of
Right,
just
right.
there for, you know.
Well, you have to know how to interpret them
Yeah,
and know where they're coming from. And yeah, I think that probably comes with experience too,
yeah,
right? And the show that you're on. But there was that story. You know who Alan Heim is, yeah?
yeah,
Because
sure.
he tells this story about Network, where it was like he marked it up and had his assistant put it together with paper clips, and that was the cut. That was it. He woke up the next morning and the movie was like it was done. And I'm like,
Right.
okay, I'm sure that's how you would like to. I mean, maybe it's, I don't know. I can't go back in time and check, but
There's a
um,
story about also oh gosh, what's that Adam McKay movie? The one about the financial crisis.
oh, The Big Short. I just watched
Big
that. Yeah.
Short. Yeah, Big Short. I think there's, a similar story about that. That I think it's Hank, is
Mhm.
that Hank Corwin? That I think he just like a first cut, that was great. We just took some time out and it was done. I've had episodes like that that were, that went smoothly, and especially on shows where once I understand, what the show is and what they like,
Mhm.
my cuts tend to go pretty quickly and my notes tend to go pretty quickly. I pick the performances that they like, and usually the only time that there's really any issue is if there's a story problem that we have to solve. But I try and solve those before I even hand it in, because I have unscripted experience and I go, this isn't working, this story's not working, what can we do? And then move pieces around and try and get it, at least present that as an option. It's not always what they want, but it starts a conversation.
Right, and you can have a number of options available in terms of like how to solve a problem
Right.
versus having a piece of work print and paper clips and
Right.
I think he was trying to prove a point of just committing to decisions as much as anything else,
Right.
which is something. It was a different process when you were physically cutting something.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
So
and you
my
come from. Oh wait, I can tell you, Rafi, I'm not done yet. You came from a world. You started on film, right? I'll keep it brief because I know Rafi has a question
No,
here.
the first thing I ever edited on, well,
Oh, it was the EMC, right?
no, even before, well, in college I did Super 8.
Okay,
Never did anything on 16. And then the first job I ever had, they had three-quarter decks. That's the first thing I really ever.
nice. Oh, the
Yeah.
work of the devil.
And my job as the assistant editor on some of those things was to go through and write out the EDLs to bring to the online place.
Online, the worst job. I did that.
Because you're like, your mind is going crazy. It's 8 digits. You have to have the in, the out, the master, and then
Mhm.
you're reading them off in the room. And if they, and they're paying so much money, and if they go to the wrong place because you wrote down a digit wrong, oh my
Mhm.
God, it was the worst.
I had to do a burn-in for the online so that they could see and confirm the numbers before. But I remember, like I was saying, because it cost a fortune. The online was like every minute was burning cash.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
hated that's linear. That was like the only linear editing in the world. Like, is the really the worst off that three-quarter of those decks. My God, if I never see one of those tapes ever again in my life, which we probably never will.
probably.
Um, well, I can't imagine. But Rafi, I'm sorry, interrupted. I'll get to like I'm looking at him on the screen, but I'm looking right here. I'm sorry to
I
interrupt it. I'll
failed
mute
to
myself.
answer. I think I failed to answer your question. Are we going to get back to your question?
My question?
no,
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 your,
Rafi's question. Yeah.
I'll just prep you. So burning questions. Where were you during COVID?
yes, okay.
What did it have to do with remote working? Were you in LA?
COVID. Yeah, COVID. I had the bad fortune. I mean, everybody had bad for COVID, but I had ended a job. I think it was lessons in chemistry right before COVID hit. And so what happened is you were lucky if you had a job that took you into COVID, because then you had some work, maybe remote work, that you could do. But I didn't have any works, and then nothing was coming up. So I had a bunch of months off. And then the first thing that I did was a pilot for Universal. We tried to get up and running they had proprietary, it wasn't all set up back then. And it was the delay in the remote work was like a little bit glitchy, and things weren't always working. So I ended up actually, because it was a pilot and I didn't have to share a lot of material, my assistant was the only other person that I had to network material with. I ended up switching after about 4 or 5 days to just local work, and they just brought the material to me and downloaded it directly. So I worked locally at home in my garage. So for my first project. And then the second project was Only Murders in the Building season 1. And we worked remotely, and there was like a little bit of a drag. They had a proprietary system. The vendor was Moviola, I think, and they had, instead of working through your computer with Jump, I'm sure it was Jump, but they had their own little hardware box to remote in with. And I actually did a whole spreadsheet. I was asking all the editors, I was sharing this information about people's experience with all the different vendors and how it was working for them, what problems they were having, hoping that that would help. So I had this resource I was sharing with everybody. In the end, now it's, great. Everybody just uses Jump, use it off of your own, you don't need a very high powered system. But yeah, so all of season 1 of Only Murders in the Building was remote, 100%. I cut it out of my garage. We did all go in for the mixes and wore our masks for one day. And it's the same way now on Only Murders. It's still completely remote because they shoot in New York. And it works, and the process works for the showrunner. That's the last thing I forgot to say before. So the showrunner my God, I just blanked John Hoffman's name. John Hoffman is the showrunner and creator, and he's the final say on notes. He's the one at the very end. But yeah, so John and I work together there's Jump, and then we use PackPost as our vendor, and they have their own sort of Evercast version called PackPost Live. It works great. So he can see what's on my screen, or at least, what I'm cutting, not my editing system, but just the output. And then we kind of talk on, there's like a Zoom component to it. And in the beginning, everybody thought that was not gonna everyone's gonna be weirded out by it, but people seem to have gotten used to it. There's other shows like Lessons in Chemistry that we cut our dailies at home, but then we went in and worked with the producers and the directors in person. So it's a hybrid now.
And are you using any AI or any other tools currently in the industry?
No, it's a tricky situation, and it's a tricky thing to talk about. There was a point where I was experimenting with AI voice replication. And it worked really well on one project. And it was always and I was always very clear about this. I told the producers, I said, this is just for temp, because if we can get the temp ADR in the actor's voice and the studio doesn't hear temp, maybe that'll be a cleaner rough cut, and then we'll have the actors replace it. The producers were not comfortable with that, so we took it all out. Ultimately, it's with all of the contracts and the possibility that it could be misused. It was never my intention to use AI to replace anybody or do work that someone else should be paid to do. So the answer is no. There are a couple of things that I do think AI should be used for, but I'm not going to say what they are, because I might be able to make $1 million creating that it would not impact anybody. It would make editors' lives a whole lot easier.
Okay, we're going to turn the recording off for a second so you can tell us what it is. Right? Don't turn it off. Oh, you saw it. Jeez. Well, I hope you get the $1 million idea. Everybody needs one of those in their life, right? Yeah. Are you ever back east? So you grew up in New Paltz, around there?
I grew up in the Hudson Valley area, and I went to school in New Paltz. I miss New York. I don't come back often enough. I'm hoping to come back this summer. I'm actually, now you saying that before COVID, you used to fly us in. I'm like, oh, that's what I would prefer, to come visit. But
it's always better to do. I mean, like editing remote, it works, and it's not a diminishing experience, but like there's nothing like being, like talking shop with a group of people in person. It's just different.
No. And by the way, I just want to thank you guys for inviting me to be a guest speaker, because I really enjoy that, and I really enjoy mentoring and sharing where I can. And I try to be as open and transparent and say the
Mhm.
stuff. I think a lot of the stuff about editing is not where to put the cut or do the thing. It's about how to handle the people sitting behind you, what that experience is like, and so I just, yeah, I think it's nice. And I've always, when I remember getting emails for Manhattan Edit Workshop and being really excited, it happened after I moved out of New York, but I was really excited that someone put together something like that.
Yeah. Well, it's and editors are, of the people we talk to, probably the most, as a group, interested in giving back. Not that others aren't, but just there's something. You said that without any prompting, and that's true of a lot of editors. They really feel, and maybe it's because you nurture assistants and then kick them out of the nest. It's sort of like born into the mentoring experience, is built into the job. But it's much appreciated. It's not, and it's great because I think it's common in that in this field. So we love having you guys, and the students obviously love it because you can't learn that on a YouTube video. You very, like the temperament things, the sort of the sort of the politics of the edit room to some degree, the social worker aspect to the job. Like those are important things, as important in some ways.
So you just stole my thunder. We usually wrap things up, Matthew, by asking what your one takeaway is. You gave us your takeaway, and then Josh gave us his takeaway from your takeaway. So Jason, you're the only one that's left. So number one, I would love to hear your takeaway from today's episode. And then please tell us what's going on here at the Manhattan Edit Workshop.
Wow. I don't have a huge, I mean, Josh didn't use an old sitcom reference in this Talking MEWShop, so I'm a little at loss. Sorry, Matthew. He usually drops some random Love Boat or Mork and Mindy, like somehow works it in. He didn't do it. So that's my takeaway. No, I mean it's great. Yeah, giving back, and like you're right. Like the editors are, I don't know if it's just because nothing's really given. You have to like kind of go through it and to become an editor. So I think people just feel the need to pass that on. I don't know, but that everything you said there is right on. Coming up, we have an event for the Lord of the Rings show on Amazon with the editor and cinematographer. We have the editors of Severance, and we have the editors of Shrinking coming up on some events. So check that out. And we also have tons of classes coming up in color correction and editing and all that good stuff.
Yeah, and we've got them running now. That's why the two of us are stuffed in this room, because all of our classrooms are full. But you know what? Better that than the alternative. We're glad people are here. And it's funny, since we started sort of going back in person, we found that very few people are interested in doing remote learn. They're all hybrid classes if people want them to be. But I think, people want to be together, and especially, to learn something like this. We'll have you back if you ever come back, if you're ever local, but we'll fly you back if you want. I got enough miles. You've been upstate since, like, the area has really changed. I mean, you must know this, like what's going on in Beacon and Newburgh and Kingston.
I grew up there, and all I wanted to do was get out. And now it sounds like all I want to do is get back. It sounds amazing. And I still have friends up there, and I might be back there this summer.
Well, that's great. My kids are college age, and so Vassar's the hot, like everyone wants to go to Vassar.
Really?
Yep. It's a gorgeous, absolutely beautiful, beautiful spot. So yeah, come on by. We'll have you back in, and if you if you can't make your flight, we'll find one for you. We're always happy to dole out some miles.
I appreciate that.
Well, now I need to plug my sister's pickleball facility, the Hudson Valley Pickleball Club or whatever.
Yeah.
Just so happens that's where she is. Anyway, you can delete that from the recording. Thank you, Matthew Barbato. We really appreciate your time. Clearly, there's much more to talk about, so we'll have to have you back. And once again, Josh Apter and Jason Banky, thank you so much. This was another episode of the Manhattan Edit Workshop. Don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, email, snail mail, anything you could do to get this ball rolling. I'm Rafi Salem. Thank you so much, and have a great night or day whenever you're looking.